Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the practice DBQ number 2 that goes along with the Unit 2 review, which the focus of Unit 2 mostly is on expanding networks of trade. So keep that in mind as you start this DBQ. That should be like your active prior knowledge. Silk Road, Sea Roads, the Trans-Saharan trade routes, East Africa, the development of the city-states on the east side of Africa, and then all the things that went along with economic activity. The Mongols were in this unit. China was still a center of innovation and luxury goods. You also have a lot of technology from the first unit that goes along with this. The caravans, the oasis cities, the caravanserai, the port cities. So all that stuff is tying together in this unit. So what I want you to pay attention to is the time on the video. And we're going to start roughly here at 1 minute and 20 seconds. And we're going to try to see how fast we can go through these documents, because speed is going to be important since you only have 45 minutes to do this on the day of the real exam. So at 1:30 we'll start, and we'll see how long it takes. Now, I have the luxury of printing this out, and I'm also going to be using this organizer too as we go through. And I know a lot of you don't have printers, but this is something you could easily draw up on a piece of paper if you need it. So I guess we'll start at the 2-minute mark. So here we go. So you get the DBQ. The first thing you gotta do is attack the prompt. Evaluate the extent to which expanding economic activity changed patterns of interaction between the 12th and 17th centuries. So every DBQ prompt is going to start with this phrase. We've seen it all year. So you have to decide how strong the relationship is, or how strong the historical thinking skill is when you get to the sources. So here is your first thing: expanding economic activity, which is what all of Unit 2 is about. So this is the growth of trade routes during this unit. All right. So you got to put it in words that make sense to you. Now it's asking you, how did this change how people, regions interacted with each other? That's what it's asking. So, was trade an important, right? That's this part. Was it an important role in how patterns changed between these dates, which is the 1100s to the 17th century, which is the 1600s? And you should know a lot of things change because of money. Money is one of the big movers for all of history, trade, and the demand for goods. All right, so let's just keep going. So let's go straight to document 1. All right, document 1 is a map. You're always going to have at least one image. In this particular case, maps, there's not a lot here. There's not dates. It doesn't tell you who made it. All you know for the most part is that you're seeing the Silk Roads, right? And you're seeing some of these important cities that developed in the middle of the desert that would have not have been there if it wasn't for trade, most likely. And you also know that this is in the between the 1100 and 1600s that Islam had a lot to do with spreading economic activity, especially in the Middle East here in Central Asia. And then, of course, the Mongols helped stabilize trade here in Central Asia. So here's the Mongols, Central Asia, the Middle East. This is Islam. You have Western Europe over on the fringes here. And, of course, you have China. Now, another thing you should notice right away, and then you have the Indian Ocean trade down here on the bottom. So all these regions, all these cultures, all these different societies from Unit 1, the global tapestry, how different they were. The one thing that connects them is trade. And mostly you can see that it's trade in luxury goods too. So these are things going to higher class people. And these are the things you need to think about. And these are things you can make in your argument. Okay? So if I'm going to do this, if I'm just going to do the document, The main idea, just real quickly, you don't have to write a full sentence, just main idea. Trade routes, silk. There's not a lot of African on here. Just say Africa, very generically. Silk and sea roads connected regions and luxury items. Something very generic. Can't do connections yet because we haven't had any other documents. Outside evidence, you can. This is where you just write down things you remember. Caravans, caravan, sarai, camels helped, the saddle, the boats on the Indian Ocean. So these are the things you want to write into your essay with the outside evidence. All right, you can find all these things on your review. Now, map, especially this map, is hard to hip. There's no intended audience. The purpose, I guess, would be to show the growth of trade routes, but I'm going to reserve a hip for a different document. So we're going to skip hip for right now. I guess you could say the purpose was to show how, if we were going to do a hip, demand for luxury goods. So if this would be a purpose, this is what I'm doing right now. The map depicts how demand for luxury goods caused a growth in trade routes. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, just the first thing that comes to your head. All right, so back to the documents. Document 2. All right, you have Yakut el-Hamawi, a Greek merchant. All right, so gives you right there, you get a point of view because you know we're dealing with a merchant and a scholar. He lived in the Abbasid Empire. That should be your clue. That's an Islamic empire in the Middle East. From his book, Baghdad Under the Abbasids. And sometimes, try to find connections. Like if you can quickly find Baghdad on this map, now I know where it is. It's right here in the center of trade on the Persian Gulf. That's what this body of water is too. So you could already start making the connection that this is a city which is the center of trade right on the Persian Gulf, because that would connect with your map, because a lot of goods came up the Indian Ocean and it has to pass through Baghdad to get to other places like Constantinople and then to Europe. Now, again, outside evidence, this is where your brain's going to start churning out evidence. This is another thing that's going to help in this time period, is going to lead to the Crusades. All right. Now, that's just something you could jot down or remember. That's going to get you outside evidence points, and you can start racking up points with just content that you can remember. Anyways, so it says Baghdad. All right. Baghdad was a veritable city of palaces, not made of stucco and mortar, but of marble. I'm not going to read the whole document out loud to you because that would just be a waste of time, but you can read it. Or maybe I should, just to demonstrate how fast. The buildings were usually of several stories. It's a city of palaces, right? So it's wealthy. A lot of money. The palaces and mansions were lavishly gilded and decorated. Both sides of the river were for miles fronted by the palaces, kiosks, gardens, and parks of the grandees and nobles, all right? Rich people. Marble steps led down to the water's edge, and the scene on the river was animated by thousands of gondolas decked with little flags, dancing like sunbeams on the water, and carrying the pleasure-seeking Baghdad citizens, right? The people that have pleasure to seek are your upper class. Your peasants and slaves were not strolling around Baghdad enjoying gondolas and strolls by the river. Along the wide-stretching quays lay whole fleets at anchor, sea and river craft of all kinds, from the Chinese junk to the old Assyrian raft resting on inflated skins. The mosques of the city were at once vast in size and remarkably beautiful. There was also in Baghdad numerous colleges of learning, hospitals, infirmaries. All right, this is the Islamic Golden Age, if you remember, from Unit 1 in the Abbasids, right? The House of Wisdom. All right, this is where you have to make those connections yourself. Okay, it's interesting that the Chinese junk, so this shows the connection between East Asia and the Indian Ocean. All right, so main idea. What's the main idea of document 2? Let's see. So we would say document 2's main idea was Baghdad became a center, a city connected to Indian Ocean trade. All right, again, I'm just didn't preview these documents. I'm just going through what I would say right now. Outside evidence. Again, you could bring in the Crusades, I guess, if you can tie that in. Other outside evidence. Let's see, they got the Islamic Golden Age. Okay, HIP. It doesn't really tell you who the audience is for. I mean, it is maybe for a European audience since he's a Greek. He is a merchant and a scholar. So, as a merchant, so if you're going to do a point of view, which is the other P, as a merchant, interested in describing wealth in trade cities. That's not a very good hit, but it is what it is. All right, moving on. You guys aren't going to have time to think about it that hard either. So, document 3. Let's do it. All right, so we're here. Okay. Marco Polo. All right, he showed up in our first one too. So he's a Venetian traveler, which is another key concept, that there was travelers during this time period. Marco Polo and our next guy, Ibn Battuta. Venetian traveler, so he's from Italy, and he wrote this famous book about the travels of the East. All right, I'm going to butcher this one. Suzhou, a city in China, is a great and noble city. Notice cities are getting mentioned over and over again, which is one of the key concepts, that trade led to new cities. All right, and I kind of missed that part on this. So connections. Document 1 and document 2 have a connection with the trade routes developing cities. All right, and Baghdad is on both maps. You could easily make the document that has a connection with document 2. Document 2 has a connection with document 1. Maybe you could just put cities on trade routes. Make a brief description of what the connection is. All right, so back to this document. The people are idolaters, subjects of the great Khan, and have paper money. So it's interesting that he calls them idolaters, just that they're non-Christian, because Marco Polo, coming from Italy especially, is Catholic or Christian. They possess silk in great quantities, luxury goods, from which they make gold brocade, which is like a fabric, and other stuff. And they live by their manufacturers and trades. And since they were conquered by the great Khan, they use paper money. The city is passing great and has a circuit of 60 miles. It hath merchants of great wealth and incalculable number of people. There are also in the city many great philosophers and leeches, diligent students of nature. Okay, again, noticing that there is education. Notice this paper money, which was one of the innovations in banking and finance in this time period. It's going to cause, and especially back in Italy, cause innovations in banking using paper money. It was a lot easier than trying to mint silver and gold coins all the time. And then they would be backed by the value of gold and paper. So that's an innovation. All right, again, outside evidence. You got to be looking for this thing. All right, so again, how would you describe the main idea of document 3? Travelers like Polo used Silk Roads to explore trade routes. He wasn't just a traveler, he was a merchant. He came from a family of merchants. Also, something you should notice about Marco Polo is in the 1300s, he was able to do this so safely because of the Mongols, right? Mongol Empire at this time. All right, so he's able to travel safely. So that would be a good thing to put in outside evidence, that he was able to travel quickly because of that. Let's go audience, since we haven't done audience yet. So his audience for this book was for a European audience. He wanted people to read his book. kind of wanted to be famous. Europeans, that's his audience, and then you can just add a little comment to describe or maybe he's trying to inform them. Let's go with inform. So he's writing to the Europeans to inform them of the wealth and goods outside Europe. All right, back to the documents. Don't know how fast or how good we're doing on time here, but at this point it doesn't matter. All right, so next we got Ibn Battuta. He was a kind of an equivalent of Marco Polo. He was Islamic, came from Morocco. He's also a scholar and explorer, and he wrote a book, Travels in Asia and Africa. And if you remember from your review, that he was really trying to just publish a book glorifying Islam and showing, how beautiful it was in different places, and describe how it looked in different places from all the places that Islam had spread to. So he's a contemporary of Marco Polo. A lot of his travels were around North Africa and into the Middle East, including Muslim Spain. So he has Mogadishu is a town endless in its size. Its peoples have many camels. All right, camels, that's cool. And made trade possible in the desert. Without camels, interactions with the environment, people would not have gotten as far. In it are manufactured another town. If you don't know, this was in East Africa. This is those port cities on East Africa, which don't show up on our original map, but they would have been like down here on this coast, maybe even a little further south. Okay, anyways. Its people have many camels. Its people are powerful merchants. In it are manufactured the cloths, named after which have no rival and are transported as far as Egypt and elsewhere. One of the customs of the people of this city is that when a ship arrives at anchor, small boats come out to it. In these boats, a small group of young people of the town, each one of them brings a covered dish with food in it. And this was a custom. If you don't remember, the city-states, like Mogadishu, they were competing. They were independent city-states competing for business. So they had this custom to kind of lure you in of bringing you food. Like, hey, come check out our shop. We'll give you food. All right. He offers it to one of the merchants of the ship and says, "You are my guest." We went to the chief mosque and prayed behind the maskra, the enclosure for the city's sheikh. When he came out of the maksura, I greeted him, and he replied to me in Arabic, "You are welcome. You have honored our country by coming, and I have rejoiced." So it's interesting that down in Africa, they're speaking Arabic. So there's an example of cultural diffusion. If you're talking about changing patterns of interaction, there you go. Changed East Africa to becoming Islamic. There's a change. Okay, so quick here. Battuta describes a custom in East Africa. All right, if you want to go outside evidence, you can talk about the Islamic expansion and how a lot of people converted to avoid paying tax. If you guys don't remember the name of that, it was the Jizya tax. All right, I'm just going to skip HIP for the speed purposes right now. So the last document. We have Bernal Diaz del Castillo. Now we have a conquistador. Notice now, excerpt from, there's not a whole lot of stuff is happening between 1354 and the last document in 1576. So we have the Europeans are now getting in on the game. History of the Conquest of New Spain. So now he's in the Americas, in Tenochtitlan, written in 1576. All right, so right away you have new tech, the caravels, and the carracks that got them over there, the compass and the astrolabe that they borrowed, better maps, all right? And then also, why were the Europeans doing this? Well, they were avoiding places like Baghdad because they didn't want to trade with Muslims anymore, especially after the Crusades. All right, they wanted access to the Indian Ocean. You know, in 1492, you could talk about how the Columbian Exchange has already happened. There's lots of stuff you can add in here. So this is where you got to be creative and just start punching in stuff that you know. So the Columbian Exchange happens in the early 1500s. Now more and more Europeans are going west towards the Americas. They were, you know, searching for riches. They wanted direct access to the Indian Ocean. They're going to set up the maritime empires in this time period. So lots of stuff going on. So he's going to describe Tenochtitlan. So we stood looking about us, for that huge and cursed temple stood so high that from it one could see over everything very well. And he calls it cursed, probably because it's not Catholic. But so he's describing it as cursed. And we saw 3 causeways, which is another fancy way for roads, which led into Mexico. We beheld on that great lake a great multitude of canoes, some coming with supplies of food and others returning loaded with cargoes of merchandise. And we saw that from every house of that great city and of all the other cities that were built in the water, that it was impossible to pass from house to house except by drawbridges. And they got technology going on here, which were made of wood or in canoes. And we saw in those cities queues and oratories like towers and fortresses, and all gleaming white, and it was a wonderful thing to behold. After having examined and considered all that we had seen, we turned to look at the great marketplace there, because of course they were there to spread Christianity, but the first thing was to find gold and riches. So of course they're going to look at the marketplace. And the crowds of the people that were in it, some buying and others selling. Some of the soldiers among us who had been in many parts of the world, Constantinople, which was a beautiful, great city on a center of trade, and all over Italy and in Rome, and that's so large a marketplace and so full of people and so well regulated and arranged that they'd never seen before. So you have another city, you know, or urban center as the center of trade, which is a theme that that was in a couple of these documents. And again, you have all the Spanish stuff going on. The Spanish, of course, establishing their colonial empire in the Americas. All right, so that's the documents. All right, so we got to get through those documents fast. All right, so again, back over here, just real quick. Castillo, again, a lot of these are just descriptions. Describes the organization, I guess, and commerce. If you don't know, remember Tenochtitlan of Aztec Empire's capital. So again, they don't ever say it's the Aztecs, but you do, so plug that in. Aztec Empire's capital. All right, outside evidence, things to consider. Trading post empires. All right, that's what was. All right, the Columbian Exchange. European exploration. And the next century, in the 1600s, which the slave trade is going to start. It's lots of stuff you can say that this is going to lead to. The colonial empires are going to start being built. New technology, all right? All this stuff you could plug in. All right, so for hip, let's just go for the quadrifecta, I guess. Let's go for historical situation. So the historical situation in this time period is European nations began exploring direct routes to riches of Indian Ocean and accidentally found the Americas, which they'll establish their empires. All right, so connection. So there's the travelers connection here. So documents 3 and 4 definitely have a connection. I should put that backwards. Documents 1, so this has a connection with 1 and 2. It talks about the cities, got the explorers. So now you have to decide. So now we're going to come over here to my other page, which is not here. All right, so this is the tricky part. So now this is where you have to group your documents. So got to review the prompt, right? This is where your thesis. This is as far as I'm probably going to take you. Group 1. So what changes did trade bring? That's what the question asks. And how strong was that change? And I would, if you had to evaluate the extent to which economic activity changed things, I would say it significantly did. All right, there's not a weak relationship there. There's a significant change there. So you have to evaluate. That's the evaluate part. Significantly change things. All right, now what specifically changed? Well, a lot of the documents had, I would say, let's see, 1, 2, and let's go with 5, and then even you could go 3, 4, and let's just use 5 again because you could use them more than once. Groups connection, trade, cause, development. We can even throw 3 in here with Mogadishu if you want to. Trade, cause, development of wealthy urban centers of trade. And I guess groups 2 connection is expanding economic activity allowed for and motivated exploration, which is going to have significant effects on the rest of the world. So that's your thesis. You just take these 2 things together, all right, and you're going to have 2 sentences. I like to do it in 2 sentences. One, evaluate. So deal with the evaluative part first. So just repeat the prompt. So the prompt again, just always go back to the prompt and just use it directly how it was. So here's my prompt. Evaluate the extent to which economic activity. So I'm going to say, and we don't have to be clever here. Just use what the prompt gave you. Economic activity significantly change patterns of interaction. And then make sure you plug back in the date between 1100 to 1600. So that's the first part of the question. Answer it directly. Second part, you just plug in these 2 things up here. First, it led to the development of new urban centers. I'm just going to copy that. Led to the development of new urban centers and allowed for and motivated exploration. There you go. That's your thesis. Now you'll have 1 body paragraph on this using evidence from these documents and another body paragraph on this. All right, and then at the same time, you would try to plug in any of these outside evidences as they connect to your story, and then plug in your HIP statements too. All right, there's 2 points for HIP this year if you do it twice. So I suggest you try this 3 times. And if you look at your rubric for outside evidence, you can get 1 point for doing it once and a 2nd point for doing it twice. You guys should all be capable of getting these 2 outside evidence points. Right, now they have to be integrated into your essay. They have to be part of the story. They can't just be random facts. So they have to kind of tie it into your overall argument. All right. Context seems to be still messing with you guys a little bit. So my advice is you pick two big ideas that happen within this unit. Maybe the Mongol Empire. That's a big idea that provides context for the expansion of trade routes. And then maybe another big event you could talk about would be, I don't know, maybe even just development of new technology that allowed this to happen. All right, then you just give specific examples. Stabilized trade. Now you're going to have to fill in the story a little bit. Stabilized trade. And this would be like the caravans and camel saddles. The credit, and you could talk about the sales and all that kind of stuff. So then I want you to always try to starting off with this sentence. So you would say, expanding economic activity occurred within the context of the Mongol Empire and the development of new technology. All right, that's your context. Now, you can't just stop there. Then you have to explain. The Mongol Empire helped to stabilize trade and made travel safe, and they helped spread cultural diffusion. Something simple. But you do have to explain it. Also, new technology allowed economic expansion with things like caravans and caravanserai, where merchants could stop with their camels from town to town, and again, another place where cultural diffusion happened and the trade of ideas and goods and stuff like that. Notice how all that tied into the theme leading up to. It's not just random facts. It's all leading up to this, my thesis. So you would say overall economic activity, therefore you can see economic activity significantly changed patterns of interaction between 1100 and 1600. It led to the development of new urban centers and allowed for and motivated exploration. This is your first paragraph. Then you're going to drop down and write this paragraph and this paragraph, and you're going to get an 8 out of 10 on your DBQ. All right? So I hope that helps. That is 32 minutes long, so that's way too long. If you guys want to see how I made that video, look at this. 2 of my kids' chairs with some wrapping paper to hold my phone above it. Obviously, I went way over the time with going back and forth between understanding the documents and explaining it, but I also then filled out this outline as well. If this helps for now, you can continue to use this outline. The day of, when you have only 35 minutes, I would suggest you do a lot of your annotating and your outside evidence right on the documents. You're just not going to have time to go back and forth. So start practicing now. We have 3 more practice DBQs before the real deal. So hopefully this helps. I'm sorry it was so long. I didn't want it to be this long. Watch it and get the DBQ done. All right, guys. Talk to you later.